The consciousness of water. Most scientific studies of consciousness are weak because scientists and logisticians like to measure things accurately. Consciousness is hard to measure. Some researchers measure electrochemical impulses in our brains and nervous systems, believing that consciousness is a function of brain activity. In this article, I'll use a different, more accessible approach to explore the most fascinating topic in the world, your consciousness. Biologists tell us that our bodies are composed of about 70% water. The other 30% is mostly hydrocarbons, calcium, and other minerals. Every day we drink and excrete water-based liquids. Our body is a bit like a river, with water constantly flowing through it. It's not like a bottle of beer where the water just sits in it until someone snaps the cap. Our body is a flowing, changing thing like a river. Look in the mirror. What you're looking at will be 70% different material 2 weeks from now. All the water that makes up 70% of that face in the mirror will be flushed down some toilet into some sewage treatment facility and will soon be flowing toward the ocean. This is the reality of our body. 70% of it is water in constant flowing change. It's not the fixed entity it appears to be when we look in the mirror. And what about the 30% of our body that is not water, the proteins and other minerals? It's the same story, but the flow is slower. Most of the cells in our body have limited lifespans. When they die, they're replaced with new cells. This is not true for nerve cells or brain cells, which they say do not die. But of course, those neurons are living things, which receive nutrients and metabolize. The individual cells don't die, but the material that they're made of is constantly being recycled. My point is that the body's not water components are in the same constant change or flow, just like the water component, but it's slower. When we look in the mirror, our body appears to be a fixed object made up of many body parts, all functioning in accord to create our life. This appearance is not true. In reality, our body is more like a stream or a river in a constant state of change, and that creates our life. When we look at a photo of ourselves 10 years ago, we should understand that our current body is not the same body in the photo. All of the atoms and molecules have been replaced. But we think we're still the same person, even though we're not made of the same material. This assumed sameness is an illusion. The material that makes up our current body is not the same material that made up our body 10 years ago. The body we will have 10 years from now will not be made of the same atoms and molecules as today's body. Our body is like a river, literally constant flowing river, constantly changing. The material that makes up this constant flow that we call my body all comes from the earth. Every atom and molecule we eat, drink, and breathe comes from the earth. Our bodies are literally made of the earth. Every atom and molecule, every cell of our body is derived from the earth. The funeral phrase, "We therefore commit this body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust," is literally true. If they added water to water, the phrase would be even more scientifically accurate, although less poetic. But that's not how we perceive our body. It is our perception that lacks wisdom and scientific accuracy. We perceive that our mind and consciousness emerge from this constantly flowing stream of atoms. We can remember what happened 10 years ago, even though all of the atoms and molecules of our body have been changed. The material that made up our body 10 years ago is long gone. Earth to earth has already happened. But our self still identifies with today's body as if it were the same body. This is illusion. This is where conventional thinkers get nervous. Conventional thinkers use terms like neural pathways, holographic brain structure, and brain plasticity. Some have done good work in exploring the connection between behavior and body parts, mostly the brain. Remember, body parts change over time. Today's body parts are made of different atoms and molecules than yesterday's body parts. In our attempt to study consciousness, let's not be conventional thinkers for a while. Let's allow our curious minds to wander within the confines of basic logic and to notice what new concepts emerge. We'll try to see past our innate delusions. If consciousness arises from our brain, as most current researchers suggest, we wonder, from what does our brain arise? Well, obviously our brain arises from the planet Earth, as do all other parts of our body. And all our body parts are like a river, with water and a variety of solid materials flowing through them. Does that mean that our consciousness is derived from the earth in the same way that our body and brain are derived from the earth? Are our body parts of the earth? Is the earth conscious? Is our consciousness merely tapping into her, that is the earth's consciousness? Are our lives merely a small part of her life? Is our consciousness merely a small part of her larger collective consciousness? I once had a teacher who said, "We are the brain cells of Mother Earth." His name was John Ardaugh. He was a teacher from the Institute for Contemporary Shamanic Studies in Toronto, Ontario. And I'm beginning to understand what he meant. In honor of John Thunderwolf, I will capitalize Mother Earth from here on. Unconventional thought number 1. Water is interesting stuff. In school, we learn that it comes in 3 forms: solid, liquid, and vapor. That's the conventional view. But let's think more deeply about that grade school concept. In its liquid form, water manifests as oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, rain, groundwater, swamps, wetlands, floods, waves, currents, mist, fog, rainbows, clouds, dew. As a solid, it takes the form of ice cubes, glaciers, snowflakes, slush, drifts, permafrost. As vapor, it is mostly part of the Earth's atmosphere: a summer breeze, a hurricane, a winter storm, a high pressure zone, a cold front. Water manifests in many forms. If water gets mixed in with other substances, it can take the form of blood, urine, saliva, bile, mammals, fish, birds, insects, plants. If we multiply it, we get forests, herds, flocks, schools, swarms, crowds. If we allow our mind to imagine the unconventional, water can take the form of our mother, political leaders, citizens, immigrants, physicists, economists, all made primarily of water. Have we stretched our imaginations too far? We may have stretched our imaginations, but we have not stretched our science. All the forms of water I have listed are made primarily of water, and the actual substance water constantly flows between all these forms. A given molecule of water can be atmospheric humidity today, a drop of rain tomorrow, groundwater the next day, sap in some tree the next day, part of a leaf, eaten by a caterpillar, turned into a butterfly. All the water on the planet Earth is constantly changing like this. We humans don't make observations like this because we were taught in physics class that water is liquid, vapor, or solid. It never occurs to us that our own body is actually 70% water that constantly flows into and out of us. We think and believe that what we are taught to think and believe. Then we live our lives with these grade school limitations. We live our lives within these delusions. So far, all we've done is looked at our planet from a different point of view than we were taught in school. We observe that water constantly flows everywhere on the surface of the planet Earth. Sometimes it's part of a life form, some plant or animal, whatever, and sometimes it's a non-living form, some river or cloud, whatever. But it always seems to be moving. Why do we make observations in this way? Why do we consider plants and animals life forms and rivers and clouds not life forms? Because that's what they taught us in science class. Why do we think life forms have consciousness and non-life forms do not? Because that's what we've been taught to think. An ecosystem is a mixture of life forms and non-life forms that appears to grow and change and adapt to its environment much like life forms. So too is a country and the internet. These everyday things are made up of both life forms and non-life forms. Are the definitions we learned in school too limiting? So far, we haven't really used our imagination. All we've done is look at our planet from a different point of view than we were taught. Now let's use our imaginations. Maybe a river is a living thing, and maybe a video game addict is not. Maybe this constant flow of water on the surface of the earth is similar to human consciousness. Our consciousness constantly moves and changes in our mind. Our attention shifts from one thing to the next. Our memories are vivid and then they fade. We sleep and we're awake. Is all this mental movement in our mind comparable to the movement of water in the atmosphere and on the surface of the earth? Is this movement of water how the earth thinks? The earth thinks? This is an impossible concept for some modern minds. To them it seems ludicrous, ridiculous. They have categorized the earth as an inanimate object and syllogized that inanimate things have no consciousness. It's what they were taught to think, and it's what they think. There are those who think that the very notion of earth consciousness is flawed. But if you check back over the logic of this discussion, you will see that it does actually have one important flaw. On the other hand, if you throw up your hands and blurt, "The whole thing is flawed from start to finish," then the flaw is your mind. Your mind is closed. It can't think about anything beyond the thought patterns it has been taught. So, if your reaction to this consciousness of water exercise is negative and emotional, you have found the flaw. The flaw is your closed mind. But if your reaction is negative and intellectual, reread this article and find the one flaw in the logic. Do that now. Reread this article, review the logic and its validity, and then see if you can find the one flaw. The one flaw is this: garbage in, garbage out. The very first assumption we made in this logic sequence is that consciousness is derived from the brain, from atoms and molecules. If that assumption is true, then the atoms and molecules that make up the earth definitely create consciousness. The earth thinks. But if you're willing to let go of the ridiculous idea that matter is the source of consciousness, then you open the possibility of obtaining wisdom. But whatever you do, please honestly follow modern scientific logic to your conclusion. Science and logic are powerful intellectual tools. Used skillfully, science and logic can lead us to wisdom. This article can be found on my website, www.kennydn.com. That's KENNYDN.com.